there are several books that I've spoken to you about that I'm working on that will be all coming out. And one of them is called Unitive Psychology, a primer. And there are 12 principles, not the principles that I taught from Thomas Berry. These are certainly owe influence to them, but they really are a step further. And they also include 12 goals of soulology. And this is a presentation. I'm doing the kind of world premiere of this to a group of something like 200 counselors down in New Jersey in December. And so I don't know if you have I handed these out? No. Okay, well these are wonderful to contemplate, to use like sutras. This is an example. The universe, its emergence and expansion or evolution, provides the ultimate context for all human cultures, as well as for each human person. The universe had no beginning. The eruption of space-time and energy matter represent a finite and temporal fluctuation in an infinite and eternal consciousness. This consciousness has 4 sequential phases in the human, known as Homo instinctus, the tribal, Homo affectus, the religious, Homo rationalis, the scientific and technological, and Homo spiritus, the unitive. And they each build on the other. That was just number 1. So if you'd like one of these, I'll give you one. If you don't want one, that's okay. Just let me know. If you do want one, signify by raising one's hand. I guess everybody wants one. Yeah. For you? Got enough? Yep. Over here too, everybody want one? They make wonderful meditation pieces, and okay, just one there. You need two. That's right. We can bring them.
She's being a grandmother.
Oh, really? I'll tell her I'm being a grandfather in a very different way. Thank you. They really do require, each of them will be a chapter in that book, and the work that I do out on the road will be changing. For the first time ever, I'll be teaching only my own books to these other fathead PhDs out there like me who are actually interested in this stuff. There will be 3 segments to the seminars that I do. The first one will be called Unitive Psychology. The second will be the architecture of the soul, and the third will be cultural addiction. Together, they will form a whole new approach to human healing called Unitive Psychology. So I figured I'd put that out there for you now. So why don't we do what we always do? We'll begin with a brief meditation, just to get ourselves in the mood. So as I ring the chime, we enter into sacred time and sacred space. And we'll just do a very brief meditation. And all I really want, there's a word in the Buddhist lexicon called bodhicitta. And what it represents is the soft spot in the heart. You know that place when you really are laughing so hard that you're begging people to stop it so that you can, because it hurts so bad in the heart? Or if you're crying with such intensity over grief or some other loss, you feel that exact same spot. That's the bodhicitta, that's the soft spot. And when we're in touch with that soft spot, much like what you pointed out on the way up here, Ian, when we're all in that place, there's only one of us, because that's the umbilicus, that's the place where we leave the temporal and actually realize our infinite and eternal selves. So that's what we're going for, is that soft spot. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to ring the chime. There'll be no talk down or any of that. We just do some breathing together. You don't have to do it out loud. As you breathe in, just whisper to yourself, in. And as you breathe out, out. And just think about that place. And we all know that place. We've all been there through laughter or through pain. And that's the bodhicitta. Now, of course, that soft spot, that place in the heart, is the locus of what in traditional devotion would be the Sacred Heart. That whole Christian or Christocentric devotional apparatus reflects that same insight, that in that core, in the center of the fourth chakra, lies that tender spot from where we cry and from where we laugh. And it is that spot that is also the place from whence we love, where we receive love, or not. More frequently, most of us protect ourselves from feeling that place in the heart. While people talk at great length and great eloquence about the desire for love and all of that, we more frequently guard that place, like Ian's doing right now with his arms. He's closing it on. It is also the place where in the mornings when we awaken, just plain feeling good, that feeling of expansiveness. We have no real explanation why some days we wake up feeling not so good, and other days we wake up just feeling expansive and permeable, as though everything is flowing and we're flowing with it. That's the bodhicitta, open, present. And in the world that we live in, it's probably fairly wise to be able to close that down because of the incredible assaults on the self. Because at that spot, we really are children. And when we're in that place of openness and vulnerability, we really are children. And that's why Jesus and many others would say, let the children come unto me, for such as these is the kingdom of God. It is because their hearts are exposed. And that's for good and for ill. Because it's good to the extent that if the child is in a safe environment where openness and truth and safety are valued, then you have a child who approaches the world that way. On the other hand, if you're in an environment of mental illness or addiction or violence, whatever it might be, it's not so good to have that place exposed. And children in that environment usually learn very sophisticated ways to protect themselves from their environment. And of course, that's the real work of therapy, ultimately, later in life, is to reopen that tender spot, that place where we can give and receive love, because in the end, what else is there to give or receive anyway? So, there's so much repair work that needs to be done, and we have a culture now that is so assaultive in terms of that tender place. And when we experience tender people, somebody like Fred Rogers comes to mind, we almost find them comical, I don't know how many times at parties I've mentioned Fred Rogers, and there's always, laughter made of him, but what he really was fully exposed. He never shut his heart down, and the guy couldn't hold a tune to save his life, and he would sing his way through these entire series of things like on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And somehow, much like Eckhart Tolle, when he walks into the room, it's almost like you can hear, and yet as soon as he opens up, and as soon as he begins to talk, you feel that, oh my God, we're in the presence of something really profound here. And that really is the sign, it seems to me, of truth, is when it can be felt in a meaningful way. And that it's non-assaultive. So, up until now, we've dealt with chapter 1, 2, and 3. I did all my favorite foursomes in the first collection, the one that's on Christ Logos Now. And chapter 1 was the silence of God. Chapter 2 was Christ in the Trinity. Chapter 3 was the cosmos, the sacrament of God. And now we're going on to the earth, which is the sacrament of the cosmos. And the reason I use the word sacrament is to underscore and indicate that every level of all of this is by its nature sacred. That we don't invest it with sacrality, it invests us with sacrality. It is the other way around, because we are a dimension of a divine universe. Our longing in the heart, way down in our tenderness, is to express ourselves in a sacred way. And not only us, as I've mentioned before, the same is true of chimpanzees. In chimpanzees especially, it's literal. I forget what I've mentioned and what I haven't, but we've comforted ourselves in trying to distance ourselves from chimpanzees and gorillas by saying that the differences between those primates and us are culture, use of tools, religion, and use of language. Well, as it turns out, they actually have the rudiments of culture. They all do things in certain ways, and it's truth specific. You can have several different troops of chimpanzees, and each troop will be doing the same function in a different way, but everybody in the troop knows how to do it their way. That's culture. Secondly, they dance, they drum, and they appreciate sunrises and sunsets. They have no voice boxes. They have a repertoire of screeches, but given computer skills, they're language capable and can communicate with us. And the fourth one, the use of tools. They make mortar and pestles and other tools, again, that are specific troop by troop. So suddenly, there is no difference. Those four differences don't do it. The extent of our development of those differences is what indicates the difference between us and the other primates. But primates we are, and we have all of it in common with them. Not so with monkeys and macaques and other lower ones, but the gorillas certainly, and the chimpanzees with no doubt whatsoever. Chimpanzees self-reflect. So now what I want to talk about is the earth as sacramental, because the earth was an ongoing metaphor in all of the Gospels. He would talk about the lilies of the field. He would say, you're aware that when it's a red sky, something's coming. I forget exactly how it goes. And when it's a different sky, something else is coming. How can you know the signs of nature but not read the signs of the times? And he talks over and over and over again. He uses water, he uses bread, he uses hen, himself as a hen. He uses all these natural symbols to describe what it is that he's trying to say about the Father and the presence of the Holy Spirit, which again, of course, is all one thing. The way I talked about H2O can come in the form of ice, a cold rock, steam, a hot beaker, or water, a liquid, and yet it's all one thing. It's all H2O. Well, it's sort of like that. So there is an unmanifest dimension to the life of God. That's the silence of God. And that unmanifest dimension is the place where, as mystics, we can cross over the event horizon of space and time. Physics can't, because it would be purely speculative within the disciplines of mathematics. They're caught in time and space. But we are not. We have a full voice, and we can experience the eternal. And in fact, all of our traditions hold that out to us as the goal of the traditions. And then sadly, as I mentioned last time, more often than not, they cap our practice at the level of religion, when the only purpose, other than, the social purposes that religion teaches, the only real purpose for Christianity or Buddhism or any of them is to bring us to the awakening of the soul, the awakening of our oneness with the whole created order. So when we look at from that point of view, we say, well, okay, there's this unmanifest dimension, and then there's the manifest. So there's kind of pre-space, pre-time, and then there's space-time, right? The space-time continuum. It's one thing, and thus it's called a continuum. Space and time measure the same thing, the distance from the beginning to this point. So it's space-time continuum. It's one thing. And what manifests then is cosmos, earth, life, and culture as emanations of the sacred. And in the Christian tradition, the emanation could be called Christ-likeness. That Yogananda was asked this question. I read him every morning. I read the Bhagavad Gita with his exegesis of it. And he's asked this question, what's up with Jesus being the only Son of God? What's up with that? And Yogananda comes back and says, no, perfectly legitimate statement, because that which emerges from pre-time and pre-space, the sacredness that is the cosmos, is the Son, and we participate in that Son. And so Jesus is not talking about his identity as, JC from Nazareth, right? He's saying, I am the Son. And he's talking about the larger truth of his real identity, his unitive identity. That's what he's pointing to. Strangely enough, John Paul II, when he came to Boston, when he was still a young man, he was still really vital and all, his first visit, and I was there, very enthusiastically there, and he made this statement which amazed me, because it was only one of two things. It was either spiritual pride and inflation, like I had never heard before, or it was such a profound humility, because he was pointing to exactly what Christ was pointing to when referring to himself as the Son. And what he said was this. He's going on, he's talking, the Pope is your friend, it's like a rock star. And then at some point he's talking about the disillusionment of the Western world, and materialism, and the meaninglessness and high addiction rate and despair, suicide, and all that. And he worked his way into saying, follow me. He didn't say, follow me following Jesus. He said, follow me. And that pope, that particular pope, was a mystic. He was a Carmelite. He belonged to the Carmelites and was an intense mystic. He was many other things, but he was a profound mystic. And what he was saying was the exact same thing. Is that which abides in me, I am now identified with. Follow me. Because in following me, you're following that unitive spirit that is the Son. And so that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a manifest universe that is the outpouring of the creativity of God as the second. The first person is behind space and time. The second person of the Trinity is the creativity of the whole thing. And the third person of the Trinity is the abiding presence within. So there's our three types of H2O, all one God, one presentation of divinity. So what comes out is, what's manifest is the cosmos, the earth, life, and cultures. All cultures. All cultures. So then I made myself a note here to read in several small parts and to interact with them. On page 17 it says, it's like 2/3 of the way down the first big paragraph. It says, if the cosmos is the self-expression of God, and if the sun-planet system is the subsequent self-expression of the cosmos, then this planet and all others are the self-expression of God and therefore divine by their very beings. Just because they're here, they're sacred. We don't invest them with sacrality. They are sacred by their very nature. So all of this comes about as a virgin birth. I used to struggle in my first years as I tried to effect this synthesis between the creed, I believe in God the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, Jesus Christ, only Son, blah, blah, blah. The creed, science, and the other religions, the Eastern expressions, in wrestling with all of it. When I was first struggling with it, I tried to figure out, how could I say virgin birth? How could I actually say, as I'm standing there, and I would, on Sunday morning, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. If those things were true for me, then I really needed to know why they were true, how they were true, and how they were true for me. And I used to offer that question up. How is this true for me? And 2 years might go by, and I didn't even notice it, but I became profoundly interested in quantum theory or something like that, and pop, the answer would then emerge. And I had a way to understand this. And what physics did give to me was this clear understanding that there was really no difference between what happened in the womb of Mary and what happened in the womb of the cosmos. That in effect, there was a perturbation of the spirit, a perturbation, awakening of the spirit that actually took on flesh. And now, am I saying that I, would hold a person to believe that in order to call themselves Christian? No. What I am saying is it was a way in which I could understand it so I could say it without being a liar. And as I've gone on, I've managed to explain to myself the entire creed, truth by truth by truth. But in a new Christian mysticism, not in this swallow it whole or go to hell kind of format, but instead, how is this true? How can we talk about this intelligently without backing it up with a fear of a hell that doesn't even exist? Why would we need all of that if we could simply talk about it meaningfully? So here you have a universe that really did just show up by a perturbation of consciousness in an eternal and infinite consciousness that suddenly erupted into space-time and energy and then matter, and then the great unfolding of the whole thing. So what is listening right now and what is talking right now is that perturbation, is that very perturbation 16 billion years later. It's in this form trying to understand itself. When you can, when that really does land, and you really get the truth of that, then all of a sudden, the wonder and the vision that's inherent in all of the tradition, the messages of all the traditions, but for our purpose, right here in the iconography of this place and in this tradition, wakes up. It wakes up. And once we feel that, then we can look over at the Buddhist and the Hindu and the Taoist and the Confucian and say, oh, that's what you're talking about. It's not the fact that you look weird and that we look weird to you. It's that you're having this internal experience because you are that same sacred cosmos, arisen into culture. You too are here developmentally 16 billion years later as Buddhists, as the Buddhist experience. And then the oneness of the whole thing doesn't become some attempt to jam things together. Oh yes, there's compassion in Christianity, there's compassion in Buddhism. It's not really necessary to do that. It's true. Those are all true. But it's when we understand that interior wonder, the awakening of wonder, the awakening of the truly spectacular within ourselves. That is where our ability to identify across cultural lines and still remain doctrinally Christian, doctrinally Buddhist, doctrinally Hindu, with no violence to anyone's traditions, just an awakening. It's like, that's what you're experiencing underneath those weird robes that you wear. So then we could think of Mary's womb as the planet Earth in miniature, because what it did, the body of Mary was the earth in a state of flow, with the perturbation of the spirit and the emergence of the differentiated soul, which constructs or self-organizes the water, the air, and the soil, and the love, and the tenderness, and the touch that comes to Mary from outside of her formal identity as Mary, all of that provide the ingredients for the growth of the form within her, which actually engendered the universe that it is now taking part in. That is like so. The knowing that is delicious enough. Realizing it would leave everyone as bald as I am. and the moments when that, to live there, in that state of realization. And that's, of course, what discipline is a realization. That's what those parables are about, the pearl of great price, and the woman who looked for the coin all day, or the lost sheep that's gone inside. And the thing that is the most precious, after a while, really is the most precious. You say to yourself, do I really need to get this, that, or that, or do I want more time for this? Because this is so much more gratifying and nourishing and meaningful than anything that I could slave for. And it's given for free. It's almost as though God waits in loneliness for some fool to come along who wants it bad enough. And then he takes that fool like me and makes something beautiful out of their lives that would have been a complete and utter disaster. My life would have been junk if I hadn't somehow been dragged into these realizations. So here you have, every time a mammal is pregnant, every woman who is pregnant is the womb of the earth in the human. See, unicellular life is open to the life systems of the planet, right? They float like scum or whatever in the water, in the Paramecia. They dart, in the universe of the water. But then life enfolds. And so what our bodies are inside of here are the habitat of the earth enfolded. And that's why it's hard to think of somebody who doesn't have cancer these days, because the life systems are so toxic that flowing through the environment of our interior, they sicken us. We become sickened. And we experience the epidemics of cancer and of addiction and of all of these disturbances in brain function, chemical imbalances and all that. Much of it is simply the movement of a creature through an environment that is toxic, and having the environment, which is toxic, move through the creature. And so once again, the sacredness of our responsibility to each other, to the animals, and to the future requires that our religious life, in a very meaningful way, represents a confrontation of that, because that's now the definition of evil. That's the definition of what evil is. Evil is that which either impedes or destroys the life of the whole. That's what evil is. It's not about, some horrible thing like touching another's body or saying, God forbid, saying, God damn it or something. Oh my God, how horrible. But it's perfectly okay to dump PCPs into the Hudson River and completely destroy the ecosystem for 100 miles in both directions. That's not sinful. That's fine, as long as we call upon the name of Jesus with 7 E's. Evil is that which destroys destroys everything else around us. So the definition of good would then represent our religious commitment to a sacred earth, our religious commitment to the sacrality of the other animals, to the refurbishing. I mentioned last time, I don't know about you, but I still haven't seen a full chevron of geese. I still haven't seen one. They didn't come back, or they're dead or something, I don't know. But I've not seen the geese return. Maybe they have, and I missed it, but I never missed it since I first heard that honking as a little boy. And I've gone out every single year and rejoiced in my backyard, sometimes perhaps over the top, when the geese come and go. And they didn't come back this year. They're not here. I can't find them. Do you want to live in a world with no geese? A world with no whippoorwills? A world with no eagles? Our religious tradition itself, what does baptism mean with poisoned water? What does it mean? How can our Eucharist be meaningful if the bread is toxic? How can that be meaningful? How can it be what it's supposed to be? So, every conception in every creature is the further emergence of God. In this model, every conception and every gestation and every birth is a moment of sacrality, is a moment where that which was unmanifest is made manifest. And that's why babies feel so holy, because they are. They're literally fresh from the Word. And they emerge in our presence with all of this power. And it doesn't matter what we might be speaking about, how eloquent or interesting it might be, the baby is more powerful and would immediately draw the attention to itself. So, when we think of the planet, we too often think of it as outside of ourselves. We are the habitat. We are the habitat of the planet, enfolded. If we were to unzip ourselves, we would be the rivers and the soils again, with the life systems and the creatures living in us. But we're enfolded, and so we have these holes through which things pour, and other holes where they pour back out. And that's really how the whole thing works. We take in the air, the water, and the soil. We process it. What we don't need comes out. That's why Jesus said, don't get too upset about your diet. Don't make a big deal about your diet. Now, I don't think he meant eat toxic food rather than holistic food. But what he was saying is, don't get all self-centered about being just perfect about this and that, because it really goes in and comes out the chute anyway. Whatever you don't need literally comes out the chute, poop chute. Out it comes. So, if the entire created order is the manifestation in space-time and energy matter of an eternal and infinite consciousness, then the question about when life begins, and people love to talk about that, when does life begin? The answer is, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's the manifestation of an eternal and infinite consciousness that temporarily abides in a certain form. And then that form is just a cocoon, and it falls away, and another form is presented. That's why they didn't recognize Jesus after the resurrection, because he didn't look like the guy that they had been walking around with. They meet him at the ocean, and they don't recognize him. He's cooking fish. So much for Jesus the vegetarian, right? He's cooking fish. They don't recognize him on the road to Emmaus, and as soon as they do, he's gone. Poof, almost like a ghost story. They don't recognize him in the upper room when when they're petrified at Pentecost. There he is. And he says, peace be with you. It's because he's no longer subject to the laws of gravity, electromagnetism, the weak and the strong nuclear force that actually are the way in which the divinity is made manifest in physical form. So the good news is, at some point, I get a new lower lumbar, fresh set of teeth. So life does not begin. It has no beginning, and it has no end. The idea of getting a life is really a misunderstanding. You can't get a life if you are life. Now, I understand what the meaning is. I'm not that obtuse. I understand what people mean. But really what they're saying is get an egoic life. Get a life, get something that expresses who you are as this individual, because we are life itself. There's nothing you can get. So, we then can look again at that four-part thing that I talked about, the developmental thing, where stage one is the building of the ego, the drawing from the environment of the sense of self. Stage two is the spiritualized or religious ego, looking for a larger context. Stage three is the breaking out of that, not necessarily leaving it. It's not necessarily to leave it. I have never left exoteric Christianity, but if I had to live only on exoteric Christianity, I'd have choked to death a long time ago. A long time ago. But I've never left. Why? Perhaps more than anything else, because of the Eucharist and the presence of others who share in the pilgrimage and the journey. But the whole purpose of exoteric Christianity is what we're talking about here, the realization of Christianity, the realization of esoteric Christianity. And then that seeks a wider understanding, and that's the unity. And we come to understand that our very being is the universe at this stage of development, and that there's no way to die. There's no way to die. There's no way to become unsacred. We just are that by nature. And our job is only to realize it, to make it real. So I'm going to give a couple of more little reading pieces here, and then I'm going to stop for questions, and we'll go on after that to chapter 5. Go on to page 18. At the bottom it says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father too. From this moment, in other words, he's saying, you even see people talk like that. They'll say, it starts now. Right? It starts right here. Right? That's what he's saying. From this moment, you know him and have seen him. And that could be said of any of us. In looking at one another, we could say, from this moment, you know him and you have seen him. And when we're in intense enough relationship, to enter into a state of breathing consciousness, I do this with people alone as a one-on-one. We enter into pure light, and we can arrive at an actual visual understanding that all of this really is true. The consciousness is visible when we allow it to be so. And sometimes it even happens like with one person in a crowd, and when it does, it's happened twice on the road, where I'll just turn into light with this other person, and the rest of the group can see it, and they're right there, they observe it. And it's actually happened with Ian and myself a brief time. Evan and I have had the experience as well. And it's a question of hitting a truth that is profound enough that suddenly that which is underlying the presence of consciousness is suddenly visible. And you can then truthfully say, I see the light. And page 19, the next page, it says, but what of the descent among the dead? What could that mean for the Christian mystic? We could say that each of us has a history that begins in God's infinite silence, emerges as universe through the Christ logos, then appears as earth, unicellular life, multicellular life, marine organism, terrestrial, amphibian, reptile, mammal, primate, and finally human. In that one sentence, I outlined the entire book, The Architecture of the Soul. That's what the second book that I published in this series is really all about. How do we understand ourselves to be that at any level? How? Human culture is the recent edge of the manifestation of the Christ logos. All who went before us are considered the dead. We can think of Jesus' descent as a journey backward, down the tunnel of space-time to his origin in God. In doing so, he reopened or cleared our way back to our original selves. His return from the dead culminated in resurrection on the third day. Thus he is the way. He showed us the way into our depth, our infinite interior selves to God. He is the truth. The way to him results in the realization of truth that we are him. He is the life. That which we call our souls, our lives, is in fact his soul, his life, in the form that is ourselves. So, he truly is the way, the truth, and the life. And our job is to descend among our own dead, unblock through a confessional experience the barrier that blocks us to the larger truth that is the size of the cosmos. So if you were to say, well, where is my unconscious? Most people think of their unconscious as somewhere in the body or whatever. The fact is, your unconscious is the universe. It's the entire universe. And that really is what Carl Jung was trying to indicate when he talked about the collective unconscious, is that each of us is a node on a universal self. And that self is eternal, infinite, and unbounded. Okay, having said that, do we have any questions?
Can you say more about something you were just pointing to, the how the confessional process opens you up to unity of consciousness?
Yeah. If we were to look, we'll just use the Jungian model. Mine is similar, the architecture of the soul, but it takes more time to talk about because it's more nuanced. So we'll just take from the sake that in this upper zone, which he calls consciousness, which is nothing more than our awareness. This is consciousness right here, this awareness that we have, that we're in the presence of others. And all of our cognitive functions are in consciousness and so on and so on. Down here is this collective unconscious, which is in fact the entire universe. You remember if you were here for one of the lectures, I said that why don't we make this smaller and we'll just call it the earth. We'll say, okay, then the collective unconscious locally is the planet Earth. Those contents that descend from consciousness begin to fill an area in us that is called the personal unconscious, which works well with PU. The personal unconscious is a junkyard, a waste pit, a landfill of psychic events, from something as simple as an itch on my calf that gives me the experience of relief. When I scratch it, that's a psychic event, but it's not something I'll cherish for the rest of my days. So all of those events are actually in this zone. They actually descend like sediment. You could call it psychic sediment. But there are also these large packets of energy you could call them quanta of packets. of repressed energy that arise, that have been events in consciousness that are too much to bear. Being brought up in Bosnia, what just happened in Myanmar and in China and in the American Midwest. They become events that we cannot function with if we keep them conscious. So we work them out of consciousness and hold them there and invest energies that will keep them there. These are the contents that need to be burnt back up through consciousness. When that happens, then there is an experiential reunion between the individuated consciousness and the collective whole. And we suddenly intuit our oneness, our unity. So Christ's descent among the dead leaves us, I mean, if we thought of his journey all the way back as the opening up, the slaying of sin and death, then we have, nonetheless, this job to do, this emptying job that I attributed in Buddhism to the term sunyata, which is emptying. So, you'll frequently hear, often with something of a southern accent, these kind of teachings that, Jesus did it once and for all, and that now, we're all saved by the one act. Well, it's really not true. We're all saved by the methodologies that he showed us, by our own need to empty, our own need to integrate those dimensions of ourselves and become whole as a result are each of our responsibilities. And that's why in Christianity there is a sacrament of confession. That's why all 12-step programs are about confession. Jung said that the psychological establishment of the Western world is a symptom of the spiritual malaise of our culture in the loss of confession, the emptying process. And what he meant was that consciousness gets isolated and we have this hyper-individuated sense with all the loneliness, all the feelings of terror and that come along with being completely isolated and the inability to believe in a God that is in fact the whole. If that helped or not, that's the best I can do July evening. Are there any others, or should I just press on? Do you want to stand up and stretch a bit, get some blood flowing? Might be a good idea. It's tough. This guy, we're supposed to have fans out.
Yeah, it's sad. Yeah. It's just not good.
We're going about 2 miles an hour out there. So.
Carol asked me to say hello to you all. She had another plunge into very intense grief experience, and it was a very difficult day for her. In fact, it was the worst so far. And she's recuperating. All right, so let's move on to chapter 5. I'd like to get 5 and 6 done, if I can, without going into overdrive. But if I can, I'll just do number 5. And we'll just continue to run behind and I'll make adjustments later. After I get done this week, if I do get 5 and 6 done, I'm going to enter into the section of the book called Prayer, Unitive Prayer. And we're going to take a very deep look at the Our Father, at the Creed, at the Catholic Rosary, and as many as I can get done in 2 weeks. And then we'll drop the rest of that. We'll take the most important ones, which I would say as Mary's Prayer of Surrender, Magnificat. And then we'll go on to the Lord's Prayer. And if we have any time beyond that, maybe the Creed or something else. And after that, we're going to enter into what I call the rites. And I've added a few rites to what we would normally think of as the sacramental mode. I've added the sacrament of incarnation, conception, and the sacrament of nativity, the holiness of birth. And just using the names right out of the scriptural source, saying that in this context, every conception is a sacred moment. Every birth is a sacred moment. And I don't mean just of humans. I mean, watching a cat give birth is just as stunning in some ways as anything else, because it's such a miraculous thing. Okay, so now chapter 5 is the sacrament of the earth, or life. Life being the next stage in this thing. We have the unmanifest, and then the manifest universe, the earth drawing itself out of the universe, and now life emerging as the sacrament of the planet itself, as this holy thing. And it's interesting to think about the fact that there were 10 billion years of cosmic evolution with no Earth. That has to be grasped. Here we are, we're the physicists that are discovering the story, but the lion's share of the story, more than 2/3 of it, almost 3/4 of it, there was no Earth, let alone life or self-reflexive thought in the human. There was just this thing going on. And, some people try to make it homocentric by saying that, well, all of this was necessary for us to emerge. There's truth in that, but that can get pretty anthropocentric, a collective egotism. I think what's most important, there's no question that it's true. It took all of that for us to emerge. That can't be argued. But I think what's most important is that most of it took place without us being here at all. That engenders a much deeper humility and a realization about really just how important we really are, individually and collectively. So, in this context, I talked about the universe as the contemplation of God. And I think last time I mentioned that in order to awaken to contemplation, we need only to allow ourselves to be contemplated. It's very facile to say that. It's important to grasp it. People get very, very uptight about how to meditate or how to contemplate, like, am I doing this right? All of that stuff comes into it. Am I breathing properly? Oh my God, I can't shut my mind up. All that really needs to be grasped is that the entire shebang, the whole thing, is the contemplation of God. When God contemplates, universes emerge, planets emerge, life emerges, reflexive life emerges. Our job really is only to allow ourselves to be contemplated by God. Our life is God's contemplation. That's how sacred we actually are. That's really how sacred we are, is that we are the contemplation of God. And all we really need to do is to allow that to happen. It's not something we have to make happen. And it's the worst blockage is all of this stuff that generates the sense of unworthiness. If you really knew who I was, you wouldn't want to look in my eyes. A corrupt understanding of ourselves is really the greatest impediment to the realization of God. All we really need to do is blow the cork on all of this and allow ourselves to be contemplated. After that, it's a simple matter of keeping the spine in a relaxed but erect posture, and to leave oneself open to the quieting of the three voices of the brain and the realization of that fourth voice. The fourth voice is the contemplation. contemplation of God. That's really what it is. It is the presence of God's thinking. It's the presence of God's delight in being and in our being. It's nothing to get hung up on in the sense of fearing it. So we allow God to contemplate us into being, and our evolution as people, individually, as families, as cultures, and so on, is nothing more than the evolution of the fourth voice, the presence of divinity unfolding within us. And our job is to be passive to it. That's why Mary's prayer is so important, and in this book is made the first prayer. Because in it she says, "Let it be done to me according to thy word." There's a complete willingness to be determined by God rather than to try to be holy or be pious or, be whatever these ideas that we have about being good Christians and good people. Those are the very things that prevent us from being them. It is allowing the death of all of those images and the emergence of God's will that is the key to the entire process. And it's so simple. There's nothing to know. It's simply a matter of being. And I don't know why this isn't taught in every church all the time. I don't know why. We're given all of these dogmatic truths, but in terms of the actual answer to the question, how, very, very infrequently hear anything at all. There's some nice insights, ideas go out, but the actual approach, and that's the missing guru. That's the missing guru in the culture. There is supposed to be what I've talked about before, starets, which is an Eastern Christian word that is the word in the Christian tradition for guru, for teacher, for dispeller of darkness, non-ordained people. So that's exactly what I'm trying to model. I'm trying to do that, to show how we arrive at real Christian experience and allow the hierarchy to do its job of running the whole machine and keeping people together and all of that. There's another guy that I've become very friendly with recently. His name is Dale Allen Hoffman, and he's a 38-year-old guy. I call him a kid, because everybody thinks a kid, but he's not a kid. He's approaching midlife. And he and I are beginning to collaborate. He's an Aramaic scholar, and he's trying to find what within the context of Jesus' language he really meant as an Oriental teacher. And he's drawing out these magnificent meanings that we're now trying to link to my writing, because he met me in North Carolina and was very excited, saying that he's read my work and that it's the closest to his understanding in Aramaic of what Jesus really was trying to articulate. And there's no mistake in that. I've studied the Orient. He wasn't born in Chicago. I've said that over and over again. So Dale, I think, is going to come and talk to you at some point. We're working that out, and he's got an 80-minute presentation where he recites the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. All these very guttural sounds. He said halfway through one of the tapes, he said, "I hope I haven't spat on anyone," because it really sounds like he's done it. But he's a non-pious, regular person. He's a married man with 2 kids, struggling to try to find the time to do this incredible starets work, drawing right from the original language. So if I can't get him up this year, I'm going to work it into next year, but I'll try to at least play a little something from a disc of him on it so you can get a taste of how magical this stuff is. Okay, so I've already mentioned that God contemplating us into being is the fourth voice. This is what I've been talking about now for 18 months, the idea of the three voices of the brain, but there is a fourth voice. Well, that's all we need to do is listen. We need only listen. And that's what Jesus says. For those who have ears to hear, let them hear. That's what he's trying to get us. Listen. Just listen. Not with these. Not with these. Though even these, Leonard taught me this technique, that if you block the right ear in deep meditation, you will immediately hear the Om. You'll start to hear. If you only take it in mono rather than stereo, from the inside, you'll hear the actual sound of the universe in your body because you are the universe. So, but that's not what Jesus was saying. He's saying, if you have ears to hear, listen, because that's all that's necessary. So then the false self, the self cut off from the larger truth of the universe, the larger spiritual truth, is a false self. It's a self, this is where Tolle goes very, very deep in his work, talking about the separate self as the formation of an egoic self, a false self. It really isn't the self that is informed from the larger truth of the universe itself. And we create this yapping little self caught separate. I wish the woman who asked me the question last time, I made a statement that said, the spirit is beautiful in all beings, and the ego is ugly in all beings. And I think she had a difficulty with my saying it. But what I was trying to say is that the separated self is ugly. Robinson Jeffers, the poet, talks about it. He says, a severed hand is an ugly thing. And man, the human, it wasn't, we hadn't gone through the 60s yet, and man, severed from life and his history, is often atrociously ugly. Beauty is wholeness, the wholeness of life and things, the divine beauty of the universe. Love that, not man apart from that, or else you'll share in mankind's pitiful confusions and drown in despair when his day is dark. That's Robinson Jeffers. The name of the poem is The Answer. And he starts off with a question. Then what is the answer? Not to be fooled by dreams. And then he goes through this whole thing. There are two poems by Robinson Jeffers that I think are among the most beautiful and intensely meaningful things I've ever come across. He's a big Sur poet, California poet. One is The Answer, and the other is Theory of Truth. And so those of you out there in the cyber world who haven't read Robinson Jeffers, those two poems, The Answer, Theory of Truth, and maybe a third called Hurt Hawks. Hurt Hawks. So, the separated self is formed of pretense. It's formed of pretense. It's the pretending that I am just this and not this. It's a pretentious posture. And that's why it always appears so ludicrous, because it doesn't have the depth and the resonance of who we really are. It's a pretentious self, and therefore, ultimately, ugly. In the religious community, there are pretentious selves that are actually encouraged. One of them is piety, this whole thing. Now the fact is, the iconography of people in this particular position looking upward is actually accurate, because the eyes turned up and in are looking at the third eye behind the forehead, the wisdom eye. But what happens is that connection is lost And we wind up with, oh, if I look like St. Francis, then I must be doing it right too. And we wind up with these syrupy pieties, these pretentious selves, when in fact what Jesus called us to, what Buddha called us to, what Krishna called us to, was a wholesome and full-blooded presentation of who we are as we are, because who we are as we are is Him. That's why He would call us, and that's why Buddha would call us to the emptying process, because when we are ourselves, we are the presentation of the divine. And the rest of that stuff they're false selves. And you know, fundamentalism is another one, that this whole way of speaking about the Lord and all of this other stuff, all of that stuff feels so yucky because it is. It's not real. It's when we can really embody the God we seek. When we incarnate the God we seek, we've become ourselves. And we know it. We just become who we are. And the pretense is not needed then, because we've arrived at the place that we thought we were journeying to, and lo and behold, it's right where we are. Right where we are. I put it in a kind of comical form once last year. I said, if you get into your car to go find your car, you'll never find your car. You have to realize you're in it. That's the awakening. I can drive to the Buddhist neighborhood. It's not there. I can drive to the Hindu, to the Taoist, the Confucian, Christian, Judaic, Islam. It's when I realize, make real, the fact that, I'm already driving it. I'm already driving it. That I already am that which I seek. That's the awakening, that's enlightenment, that's salvation. All those words that wind up carrying so much baggage and engender so much spiritual capitalism and power trips and condescension and condemnation and all the rest of it. The words awakening, the word enlightenment, the word salvation is just a realization of our own divinity, and that we are inexorably united to God because we are the subset of that which God is. So anything that covers that up becomes ugly at some point. It just becomes ugly. No matter how young and pretty we are, if we don't deepen into who we really are, then we just become cynical and ugly. False selves then serve false gods. That's what happens. Because we're unhappy, because we're separated, because no matter how good it looks from the outside, no matter how manicured the lawn is, how many rooms there are in the place, how many thousands of square feet, and all the rest of it, we wind up alone and lonely, serving false gods in our loneliness, because we don't understand that all we have to be is who we are, and because we don't really value that in each other, the true sacrality of who we are. So we serve false gods like consumerism and addiction and greed and power and one-upmanship and piety and all of them. They're all false gods that we serve when we forget our own divinity. And we talk about nature as though it's something out there. The very presence of life itself is the same divinity. And that's why the realization that we are life, that we're not a life, that we can't have a life, that we are life itself, that there is no death. That realization gives us the freedom to then be who we are and realize that we are the presence of divinity, and that the natural world is no more out there than the voice that's coming from in here is out there. It's all one. It's all one thing. So the different names for the Spirit are different names for the one. They're not different ones. And when we think of just the Abrahamic religions, the great monotheisms, here you have three monotheisms that are really one tradition. And they have one spiritual capital called Jerusalem. They represent one of the great transmissions of divine wisdom to the world. There's the Abrahamic, the Chinese, the Indian, and the indigenous, which includes Africa. And that's it. Another four again. Here, the Abrahamic faiths, all three of them, blowing each other into Hamburg, when the God that is manifest in all three is the exact same understanding of God. And the prophet of today must confront all three, not any one of them. The great prophet must reclaim the city of Jerusalem as the capital of monotheism and confront all three traditions in the name of Yahweh Allah, Yahweh-Allah, to just cut it out. And after that confrontation, prophetically, then the one tradition, the one Abrahamic tradition, needs to be confronted in its view of the other great manifestations of the Word of God, the fourth voice, whether they be Chinese or Indian. And so we await that insight. We await the prophet that will adequately confront all three murderous understandings of monotheism in the name of the Lord God.
Do you think it's going to be a prophet rather than an awakening across the world?
Both.
Okay.
Both. I don't think the prophet would be able to summon the authority, the vibrational authority, you know what I mean? The feeling of the experiential truth, would not be able to embody that if the whole tribe of us in some way were not awaiting that to happen. But I think it will be stated as one confrontation. And much like the traditional prophetic language, it must be God who speaks. So the person, the confrontation must come from total emptiness. The way Rumi puts it, let me be the flute that you play. You know, this empty reed that is played by the mind of God, by the fourth voice, by the presence of truth. And I think the world is just about ripe for that. I think we've come to a certain disgust with our treatment of each other, our treatment of the other species, and our treatment of the water, the air, and the soil which we share. A certain revulsion. It's like, you know, if you saw the movie Gandhi, when they just kept pouring up to the British and taking a whack on the head. Did you see that movie, Gandhi? Remember when they just kept coming and coming, bang, and they could get the ball down? After a while, the British soldiers just grew disgusted with themselves. They, what are we doing here? And I think we're arriving at a place where that disgust will be enough, so that we will begin to open ourselves past our individual blinders, ideologies, political obsessions, our greed, self-interest, all of it. I think we're arriving at a place of ripeness where we want to embrace one another, regardless of what we're told to do or not do. Remember at one point when I was winding myself up here, I talked about we have to begin by not taking comfort in lies and not listening to the comfort of fools. It begins there. It begins with just the disgust with having been manipulated over and over and over again by the same old lies, and by having comforted ourselves again in the advice of fools, and then finding ourselves in the position that we frequently find ourselves with much going wrong, and wrongs being done that we never intended, individually or as a people, especially this people, the American people, especially the American people, because we are the divine experiment in oneness. We'll get to that chapter. If I only do one chapter from the end of the book with the essays on, that's the one I'll do, God's experiment in oneness, because we have a real responsibility to the life of the whole, because we are the whole in condensed form. And our protocols that we discover will be the protocols of global civilization. It has to come from us, and we can do it, and we will do it. We will do it. There's no question in my mind. It must have looked pretty bleak while the ships were going down in the Atlantic in 1942 and 43. It must have looked very bleak. And yet, when it's all said and done, we're the people who rebuild our enemies, our former enemies, and make them richer than ourselves. That's who we are. That's who we are. The Romans didn't do that. They went in and salted everything. They salted everything. They covered everything with salt, so not a blade of grass could grow. That's called scorched earth. They scorched the earth. That's not what we do. Not who we are. With a Marshall plan, when we're in our true self. We're in our true self. So we're going to close today with just this. Jesus himself was a member of the life community that he contemplated into being. And on page 24, there's a little bit about that, and we'll close on that, open for a few questions, and then go home on a hot night. So at the first full paragraph of 24, Jesus Christ was a member of the life community that he contemplated into being. In realizing his oneness with and as the one, he spoke as the life community, as the earth, as the cosmos, and as the pre-existent being whence they emerged. On hearing him, people remarked that unlike the scribes and Pharisees, I put in parentheses the exoteric religious functionaries, he spoke with authority, with authorship. How could he not speak with authority? He was the author. Being emptied of his egoic self, he realized his divine personhood. His emptiness, spoken of by St. Paul, was the source of his authority. Offspring of God, he spoke as God's being. Although identified with authorship of the whole creation, Jesus, like each of us, was a human being within it. He was one of the many that are the one. Jesus emptied of himself, open to the wisdom of his Father, then speaking as himself, he could speak with the whole architecture of his soul. The whole architecture of his soul is the cosmos. We, each of us, are also that same architecture, that same soul, that same self. We need only empty ourselves and remember who we are. And we don't remember who we are until we empty ourselves. Then our responsibilities change a little, as well as our state of pain, because our pain is not only of that little pretentious self, but now we start to feel experientially the horrors that have been inflicted on the whole community. And it's like a toothache. You know, when you get a good toothache, you get to the dentist. Whether you can afford it or not, you get there. And it's like that with this, that once the pain really does become an individual experience of the whole, there's just nothing else to do. There's nothing else to do except to find a way to respond. So responsibility, the ability to respond, then becomes the impetus behind the willingness to say with Mary, let it be done with me according to your word. So we'll do chapter 6 next week, and then we'll break into prayers. Are there any questions or anything need to be further unpacked or talked about? Whatever. So, we'll do that. We'll meditate again briefly. And I don't know how many of you have had the experience where you're meditating and you suddenly have this sensation in your body. You just feel this presence in your body that's always been there and you've always felt, but you've never really contemplated or commented on, even to yourself. And then suddenly you say, oh, I wonder if that's it. And the answer is a resounding yes. That's it. That's why Jesus would say, it's closer to you than your hands or feet. It's closer to you. Because what it is that which you understand yourself to be. It's the presence of yourself. Uncovered, not covered over by a pretense self, an egoic self, a religious self, or anything else that would prevent the wholehearted embrace of who we really are and the opening of that bodhicitta, that little place in the heart that is the connection point. It's the belly button of eternity. The bodhicitta is the belly button of eternity. It is the place where we are fundamentally attached to the whole. And that's why when the laughter gets to be a bit too raucous, we feel like we're going to burst. Because there is too much coming through. And we start pleading with each other, please stop. I'm going to die here. You know? Yeah. And we actually say that. I died laughing. All right, so I'm going to ring the bell again. And when we enter the sacred, which is, of course, the whole, we'll try to allow ourselves to be contemplating, not going into it trying to figure out how to do it. Instead, putting the burden upon the sacred to do it for you. To say, well, if you're here, I'd like to know about it. How about it? And just allow that to be present. Put the burden on the whole. We're just little children, each of us. So just put the burden on the whole and say, you know, if you want me, I'm alive, awake, and available here, but I need to know. I need something here. How about it? Taught to call God on the carpet. And that's what we need to learn. How to call God on the carpet. Say, you know, you've got a job description too.